Hello and welcome to this episode of Timeless Topics. This is part one in a three-part series on how we cultivate hope and honor our shared humanity through those moments of connection, whether they're at a conference, during a class, or in a conversation. In this episode, we discuss everything from the different levels of care in neonatology to the concept of nurses eating their young. We hope you enjoy this longer form discussion with an added dose of spice. We're so excited you're back with us, and let's go ahead and jump into the conversation. It's like, oh.
It's been so funny, talking to people after they listen to it. And, a couple of the docs that I work with have kind of been listening to me talking to others about it. And I was like, it's old school circle time, right? And they were like, well, how do you guys decide on what you're going to talk about? I was like, we don't. I was like, sometimes we just sit and we see what comes out, right? I was like, and that was kind of the way that it started. He's like, we just sat and started talking. And then somebody was commenting on the diversity amongst the three of us. And I was like, right? I was like, because if you put us in a room together, you would probably not put the three of us at a table. Right? I was like, but then once we all get at the table together, it's like, oh, look at here. Right? Like we can change the world. I was like, and if others would stop and consider that, right? I remember having a conversation with a neonatologist one time, and we discussed kind of that we almost isolate or segregate ourselves. I was like, because when I walk into, say, for example, some of the big neonatology conferences, right? I will sit, look around the room, and if I don't know anyone, then I'm going to gravitate towards the table where people may look more like somebody I could talk to, right? It's like I'm not going to be the one that walks up to the table of a bunch of strangers, sit down and introduce myself. And that's a me thing, right? That's something that I need to work on because he was the exact opposite. He was like, oh no. He was like, I'm totally going to walk into the room, find the table where the people look the most different than me. And that's the one I'm going to sit at because that's the one where I'm going to learn the most. And I was
Ooh,
like, you're right. But that takes a lot of confidence,
yeah.
right? Takes a lot of courage to not want to be shut down, to not want to be pushed away, right? And so I don't know that everybody has that courage and confidence.
Yeah,
But
it's funny that you bring that up because I was at a palliative care conference last week and we're in these desks and it's like in like a classroom. And so it's all these interlocking desks with the little desks that come up and over, and I haven't sat in one of those in a very long time, right? And so I'm sitting in there and I'm trying to figure it out and I was like, man, these are so tight, like we're so like on top of each other. And but the lady next to us does not know me at all. She's from California. I've never met her in my life. And she was like, oh, here, let me help you. And like she starts moving stuff around. She like literally grabs my coffee out of my hand. She's like, let me hold this for you. And like she's doing all this. And I was like, you're the nicest person I think I've ever sat next to at a conference. Like, and like the whole 3 days, we just wrote it out together because it was just, how was your evening? How's this going? Like, and it wasn't even necessarily talk about the conference. It was just general, like, are you good? Like, she was like, oh, I noticed you like this juice and they had it one, so I bought you one. And I was like, oh, well, how nice of you. Like, nobody does that stuff anymore. But it kind of made me think of the circle time concept, right? Of like, you kind of don't have to know everybody if you're able to make enough of a shared connection and a shared purpose. And, assuming you're going to a perinatal palliative comfort care themed conference, you're of a type of mind about this work, right? And I think she just took a chance and it worked. I could have not been nice, she could have not been nice, but it ended up adding a little extra, something something to the conference for us, right? Because typically I'm more in a line with you. Where like I'm not gonna like go out of my way to avoid people, but I am gonna be like, okay, but do I need to sit at the one that only has one seat left? I'm gonna let somebody else have that experience. I'm gonna go over here with these like three people who are looking at their phones or looking at emails. And I was like, maybe you're my like quiet, introverted kind of people. Because sometimes people are surprised to find out that I very much identify as an introvert. I don't want to talk to anybody most times ever. I'm just good at it when I do need to talk to people. But if I had a choice, I would have a strong preference for a very small group, right? But sometimes it's you surprise yourself at what you're able to, how you're able to connect with somebody, even a total stranger.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, I was just recently at a conference as well, and a lot of what you guys are saying is resonating. It was, yeah, it was in Oklahoma, and I was really struck by how lovely and kind and just, I don't know, just really just personable folks are in Oklahoma. And kind of that whole thing about when you're coming into a space and you don't know a soul, trying to find something that helps you connect with the group. Because, like you said, Jessi, I also do kind of lean towards being introverted. I mean, I love to be in front of people, but I find it very depleting. Um, Obviously, not to the point where I avoid those opportunities to, kind of put on my extrovert a little bit, but it does take something out of you. But again, when you're in a space where there is that common denominator, like why is everybody here? Well, they're here because we're all really passionate about this particular topic. And that almost feels like it creates a bridge to kind of overcome. And not knowing folks can sometimes be a little bit of a blessing, because if you mess up, I probably will never see you again. So it's okay, kind of a thing.
Yeah, it makes me think of, we've mentioned talking about conferences at some point, right? Like,
Mm.
because I think we all, through various roles, are involved. Like Tracy is like planning committee and like in on that side. And I'm, voyeur, but I speak sometimes. Mary speaks all the time. So like, I think it's still like a diverse way to look at conferences even. And that probably shortchanges all of y'all's many accomplishments. So forgive me. But sitting there and, kind of thinking about the community that can come from conference settings with that shared idea of like, okay, on paper at least, we all paid a bunch of money to show up to learn about the same patient population. So we got that going, right? And then perhaps we can build from there, depending on what the culture is in the organization and the, general vibes of the people going, and even down to like the weather, like all these kinds of things that you can and can't control will, influence that. But at least I find most of the time when I leave a conference, it's like, oh wow, there are other people out here trying to do this work. Like it doesn't feel as isolating, to Tracy's earlier point, that we sometimes will do to ourselves, even just in the context of like the hospital. Like my NICU experience has always been in a birthing hospital where I'm like the one baby unit in a giant hospital full of big people. And it's like that in of itself is isolating, because you just immediately like, you don't know what I do, I don't know what you do. Like, I'm not mad, nobody's mad at each other, but we just don't speak the same language a lot of the time. But then it can feel kind of lonely when you're like, well, I want somebody to help me with my check off, and it's just me and my lovely CNS friend who I can sometimes get to help me. But it's interesting. I think, especially thinking of that lens, not only through healthcare, but through the healthcare of like the NICU. I think it's interesting sometimes the islands we end up on.
I think you bring up a good point though, because I'm also my background is also in a birthing hospital. But then when I have these opportunities to go to these children's hospitals, it's like it feels like a whole different world. And I know we have some similarities, but it's I think it speaks to just the expansive nature of neonatology in general and the spectrum of patients that we serve. To see folks work in that environment, that level 4 children's hospital environment, almost feels like, oh yeah, I don't do that stuff. Like it's very humbling and very sometimes it can kind of make me feel a little bit like inferior. I know that it probably is not the best word to choose right now, but in some of those environments, that may also be just because I'm out of practice, not at the bedside anymore. And just to see that rapid pace of technological and innovative advancements in these diagnostic conditions that used to be like, kind of, I don't know what the right word is, like not very good survivability. in some of these diagnoses. And now there's just so many innovations that it can really feel pretty daunting and inspiring, right? I mean, from this population. So
No, I think it's that concept that again, it goes back to the idea that we all have a place at the table, right? We all have something that we are bringing that is a strength. We all have areas that are our weakness, right? That we're not, maybe that we're not as strong at, so that it doesn't have a negative connotation. And I think it's the same when you talk about the various levels of NICU, right? And there are some where the entire unit is just going to be strong at this one particular thing. Other
yeah,
things are not going to be as strong at, right? And so the same that we do with each other, give grace, help each other out, emphasize our strengths,
yeah,
maybe not downplay our areas that we're not as strong, but let's not pinpoint them, right? And I do agree with you. I do think it gets to the sense of I'm better than you. I have this, that, and the other. And it's like, cool, I'm glad you got that, but look at what I have,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
mean, I worked in a unit this weekend and I said to the nurses, you are some of the strongest nurses that I've ever seen because they are functioning with less of the resources that you would find in some of your bigger, fancier units, right? We talk about it a lot in global work. When you go to some of these sites and they have the bare minimum,
yeah,
they are reusing things that for us, we open, we drop it on the floor, you throw it away and go pick up another one, right? The nurses are happy. The families are happy. The babies are taken care of in their sense of taking care of them. And there are things that they do that I'm like, wow, if only we could do that. The mothers in Tanzania laughed when I told them that our families sometimes, a lot of times, most times, have to go home and they can't stay because they have a big unit where everyone is there 24 hours a day until the baby goes home. And they were like, so they just call? And I was like, yeah, it is kind of sad, right? And it didn't even strike me until the end that they were looking down on us,
yeah.
right? And it's like everybody's got their strength.
Mhm.
And there are things that I'm like, we do very, very well and we share that information. There are things that they do very, very well. They share that information, and at the end of the day, we all grow from it because we sought out someone who is different than us. And we had a dialogue and we had a conversation and we learned from each other. So it all ties back in.
Well, yeah, thinking about like the concept of equity, right? Like oftentimes we talk about equity, we talk about taking it from somebody at a higher level and giving it to a lower level without realizing that it's really a reciprocal kind of relationship, right? Where like you would hear a lot of people be like, well, in a developing country, they blah, 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 like everything they do is somehow beneath something that happens here. When to your point, there are beautiful things happening there that honestly, we could probably take some notes from, right? Like the fact that we kick parents out for shift change or we kick parents out, period, right? In a place where they're just like, I couldn't even imagine that. Sure, I might not have, some fancy TV room or a private room with a bed and all that in there, but like I'm still able to be here in a parenting aspect for my child, which a lot of parents in American NICUs and even in other developed countries can't say that. So it's really sitting there and thinking like, what can everybody learn from each other and lean into everybody's diversity? Because you'd probably be more surprised than not at where there is something to be learned on each side, rather than just thinking I'm being benevolent because I am a have and I am sharing what I have to an have not person, without realizing that narrative in itself is biased and full of, kind of fast trained to dehumanization. So you have to kind of check that bias, even when the bias is coming from a place of positive intent.
Mhm. I think what you guys are kind of capturing for me is kind of that mirroring that happens in healthcare and in our specialty that is a reflection of the larger society, the hierarchical elements of like, well, you're level 4 and you're only level 3 and you're only level 2. And oh my gosh, you're like in another country that's so under resourced. We don't even have a number for that. That a lot of that tension and kind of, I'm going to say this word, I don't know if it's okay, that almost superiority that kind of can manifest itself in all of these different, flexion points, really represents the larger struggles I think that we've faced societally in trying to rebalance and really create a more equitable and collaborative milieu that actually, when you were describing your story about the Tanzanian environment and just other communities in some of those, under-resourced countries share, they're like their minds are blown because what is so fundamental to them from a societal perspective is family, is connection, is, that Ubuntu, kind of mindset versus here it's all every man for himself and squash the smaller man as quick as you can kind of a thing. And so it's so interesting, the more, at least for me, the more I journey into this and really start to unbundle and untangle all of the different elements that are wreaking havoc in, I think, our hearts and souls in doing this work. um, you kind of see things that, you're like, oh, is that what was underneath that stone? What the heck is going on here? And I think that's just a natural part of what we need to do. We need to journey through that process and disentangle and unbundle and shine a light into these facets that really are not serving. They're certainly not serving us. And if they don't serve us, and I say us as healthcare providers or professionals, if we're not served, it makes it wicked hard for us to then serve others who are in a position of vulnerability as a consequence of needing healthcare services. I hope that made sense, but it was really just interesting listening to you describe those exemplars and really finding resonance with that mirroring.
I think it's definitely that sense, when you mentioned the word superiority, I think it definitely is, right? Because when you think about it, it's the sense of, again, we are better than everybody else, right? And how we are going to continue to emphasize that is to exploit the areas where someone else is less than, right? So let's talk about how bad, right? Like, look, they can't do this, they can't do that, they can't do this. And it's just our collective, our way of trying to put someone else down
Mhm.
and trying to convince everybody else that they're bad,
Mhm.
right? And you see it in so many aspects of life.
Oh, yeah.
And it is just, but when you really, like you said, Mary, when you really start to sit back and watch it, you're like, oh, yeah, that is what's happening
Yeah.
there, right? And I do think sometimes we see that within our profession. I think the concept of nurses eating their young,
Yeah.
right? I think we see it when we talk about generational aspects. Let's talk about how bad our baby nurses are. But let's not remember that they are bringing something to the table that none of us have, right? But we don't highlight that. We
Mhm.
only want to talk about the bad because we need to make ourselves be
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
instead of, again, let's elevate everybody and we elevate everyone, then we're all going to win.
Right.
At this
Right.
point, none of us are winning. We're all losing this race. We are stepping on each other. We are, I think it makes me think of the visual of like, a scene where there's a riot and people are just kind of trampling each other, right, to save themselves. So we're just going to continue running over each other instead of saying, hey, sis, let me give you a hand up and let's run together,
Yeah.
right? And we both gonna make it out and be able to tell the story. But maybe that's Pollyanna thinking.
No, hold on to that. Don't let that go, my friend. Don't let that go.
Like we need more people to remember that.
Yes.
I was waiting for the Eat Your Young, to get in here because it's something that I've dealt with my whole education career of they're so quick to be like, these new nurses. And you're like, first of all, I would like to remind you that you did not walk out of a womb and onto a graduation stage and into a NICU. So like you also had to learn something. And so you need to remember that you need to be that community now. You survived this career thus far from your community who taught you and saved your butt sometimes. Because I can remember even my own time being like, oh no, girl, you don't want to do that. Oh no, I don't. Thank you. Oh my gosh. But without that, and now we create these cultures where it's like us versus them, then they all huddle together and there's no one to save them from making a mistake.
Right.
And so you sit there and you just wonder, well, of course they're leaving the workforce in droves. Like we're kind of forcing them out sometimes. And I think, again, the NICU is, I think, very different in some ways than some areas of healthcare because we tend to keep some people, although we're getting our fair share of turnover now, more than we're used to.
Mhm.
And so you're getting a lot of newer people, which I'm here for, right? New perspectives, new skill set, new mindset. Like I love it, right? There's nothing more inspiring to me than like a new grad who is like just learning to fall in love with the preterm or the NICU population in general. And they're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it just makes me think like this is why I do what I do, right? Um, but we have to foster that sense of wonder and like keep it there and not stomp it out because it's easier to stomp it out and be like, well, of course you don't know how to do that because you just got here yesterday and blah blah blah, rather than saying, I remember what that's like. Let's get through the situation and then let's talk about it afterwards, right? And even for people who don't, think of themselves as preceptors or as teachers or like, that kind of mindset, you can still facilitate some of the best experiences by just sharing your lived experience with somebody. I can how many times I learned stories from just listening to tales from years before of like what we used to do, just being like, oh, that gave me meaning for how we got here.
Mhm. But you're grounding this, which is absolutely beautiful, in a relational orientation, right? That it is that balanced, mentorship, where you're learning from me, I'm learning from you, and that's good, and not this kind of perception that it's a zero-sum game, that for me to win, you have to lose, kind of a mentality. And I think, unfortunately, because our larger everyday life is like that, and it's so gosh darn insidious, in ways, because it's literally the water that we're swimming in, right? That it can be hard to kind of like cross over the threshold into the NICU and dawn a new awareness, right? That I think, if that's where you want to start, that's great. But I think, kind of what you're speaking to isn't unique to NICU, although we are very passionate about the NICU population. I think sadly it transcends, all specialties and everything, right? I mean, it's not just healthcare, but it is everything. And not to pivot this to my favorite topic, but I think, this is why it's so wicked important to really help people understand kind of the underpinnings of trauma-informed care, which I'm starting to get a little bit icky about that terminology, because I think it can be off-putting to folks. But really, at the end of the day, it's really just connecting with another, you know, living being, and being curious and being respectful and being compassionate. And kind of like to the beginning of the talk, about, going into that conference space, not knowing anybody, but figuring out, how do I make a connection? Um, do I feel like I want to make a connection? Because I don't, I mean, if you don't connect, it's okay, like be who you are, but don't feel like you also have to be repellent, to folks as well, and kind of, cut yourself off. But you can tell I'm in this headspace, and it's kind of spilling over into everything. But I think there's just such an opportunity, particularly in our specialty, because we are caring for people during such a critical, defining moment in their lives, and how we show up. It just makes such a big impression, right? It just has a big cascade.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Timeless Topics. We welcome your feedback and suggestions, so please reach out. Our handle on all social media platforms is @TimelessTopicsNICU, and our email address is timelesstopicsnicu@gmail.com. See you next time.